He is not good at counting. Welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. This is Gary Harper. I am sitting with a young lady, is Beth Kidd. She is the founder and general manager, what is it? Executive director of Place of Promise in Lowell, Massachusetts. And she's done some amazing things. But before I get started, I kind of wanted to go off on a little bit of a tangent first. One, last week, if you watched the show, you know that I told you that September 23rd was going to come and go, and that the Revelations 12 prophecy was talking about when Jesus Christ was born, the devil tried to come down and kill him, basically, which is what Herod did. Mm-hmm. That's always the way I've looked at Revelations 12, and last Saturday has not dissuaded me from that position. If you're watching videos on when dates and times when Jesus Christ is coming, you're really barking up the wrong tree. You should really study the scripture instead. It's a lot more valuable way of using your time, because he is coming soon. What else? Oh, people taking their knee. I want you to think about this. It says, I pledge allegiance. Okay, so you're pledging your alliance to the flag, so that's the red, white, and blue, of the United States of America. So the flag represents America, and to the republic for which it stands. So when you're saluting, saying the Pledge of Allegiance, you're pledging allegiance to the Republic of the United States of America. Keep in mind what that is. The Republic of the United States of America is an idea. You're pledging allegiance to an idea, the principle of a government that is limited by the Constitution and by the people, a government of the people. When you don't stand for that Pledge of Allegiance, who are you aligning yourself with? When you don't stand for that Pledge of Allegiance, you are being disrespectful to all the men and women who went overseas within this country, who fought the Civil War. Those are the same people. Go up to Concord, to the State House. You can still see the flags from the Civil War, where there's still bullet holes and blood from the men who lived and died fighting for that republic. So if you're not going to align yourself with the Republic of the United States of America and to the Constitution, it says, like in the Declaration of Independence, we are endowed by our Creator. That is what it's all about. All the things that they're protesting have nothing to do with that. When you pledge allegiance, you're pledging allegiance to an idea of limited government, an idea of freedom, an idea of liberty, an idea of a country founded under the idea that God is the cornerstone of that republic. So if you're not going to pledge allegiance to it, who are you pledging allegiance to? And the people of color who find it necessary to take a knee, it is that republic, that document, that led the fight for the Civil War, that gave them their liberty. It's the whole idea. If you look back to who started the Civil War, it was Christians. Why is that screwing up? Sorry, I got a delay here. Something's going.
What's going on?
I'm getting feedback on yeah, that's it. Sorry.
Is it all set now?
Yeah, it works now.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's my diatribe. I kind of get sidetracked, but basically, I was at my PAC 118. The Scouts. My grandson Scotty was going up in rank last Monday night up Camp Carpenter, and guess what? No Scouts took a knee. There's only really one reason you should take a knee, and that's You're gonna take a knee for Jesus Christ one way or another. You're gonna take a knee before he comes by joining his family and asking him for forgiveness, or you're gonna take a knee when he comes, and you will do it reluctantly. So you can take a knee, but it's not when the stars and stripes are raised and when people are pledging allegiance to the flag. So that's just I didn't do it well, but I know what I meant. Anyway, Beth.
I agree.
You agree. Beth, you're an awesome lady. I only watched a video about you, and Joe's been talking to you. We went on a motorcycle ride, and he was saying, "Oh, you got to get her on the show and stuff like that." And then I watched the video. I want your testimony as to how you ended up starting this home for people who are recovering and other things. You have three different things. You do a residential treatment. Is that just for drug and alcohol, or is that for a lot of things?
No, it's for anything that's hindering your ability to live.
Okay. So people who are just on the wrong road.
99% of the people who come have substance abuse history.
Okay.
But a lot of them have mental health histories, been incarcerated, been homeless.
Right.
You know.
So that's one. You have 5 residential homes. You do that. You have the Promise Network.
Yes, the Promise Network is trying to gather other providers and other churches and get us all on the same page to try to work together.
To help people. Okay.
The thousands that are still out there.
And then there's Kids of Promise.
Yes, and the Kids of Promise is really where my heart is, I think, these days. But the Kids of Promise is trying to reach the children, primarily in the streets of Lowell, of the neighborhood. It's a way of Place of Promise giving back to the neighborhood where we're located.
Okay.
And we serve the residents' children's as well as the children of the surrounding neighborhood, and try to help them to get to know God through Jesus Christ and learn that there is someone with them, that they're not alone. Most of our children have at least one parent incarcerated or one or two parents addicted
to drugs yeah.
and alcohol, and so they struggle a lot with not having anybody to help raise them or help listen to them or put them first in their lives, and learning that God loves them and puts them first and is there with them helps them.
All right, I want to go back to that, but first I want to go to your testimony, how this all started, because I got a brief Reader's Digest version. I really thought it was pretty awesome. So if you could tell us how you ended up doing this.
Okay, but you only have an hour show, right? So.
Yeah, that's all right.
No, I'm just kidding. I would say that I started when I was really, really young. When I was 13 years old, I went down and volunteered to work in the Philadelphia City Hospital.
Now, where did you live at the time?
In a little small town right outside of Philadelphia.
Okay, so you didn't live in the inner city yet. You just wanted to go there and help.
I did. I found my way to the inner city, and
Jeez.
I saw...
Can you imagine a 13-year-old finding their way to the inner city today?
Yes, and to the city hospital in Philadelphia, which had 2,000 beds. And they put me on a women's surgical floor, which had 60 beds in the one large ward with a fan at the end of the hallway to try to keep them cool. And there was one nurse for 2 wards. So one nurse took care of 120
wow.
patients. And back then, they were amputating the limbs of all the addicts who got abscesses and who had...
Oh, really?
They didn't know how to save the limbs. They didn't know how to treat with... They didn't have the antibiotics they have today.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them were in there getting their legs amputated, their hands amputated. And so it was... The very first day I was there, I said, okay, there's a verse that I had learned that's in Matthew 20:25, and it says... Jesus said, whenever I'm sick, you came and took care of me. When I was in prison, you came and visited me. When I was naked, you came and clothed me. When I was thirsty, you came and gave me a drink. And whatever you, and I say, when did I do that for you, Jesus? And he said, whenever you've done that to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it to me. And so I learned then that my calling, and I really believe God called me that right then, that first day I was there, to the inner city, and to the thousands of hurting, lost, broken, sick, suffering people, and I had a message for them.
Wow.
And I was called to care for them, and I became a nurse so that I could care for them better. And I got married and moved to Boston, and we moved into the inner city of Boston, right in the heart of Roxbury, North Dorchester, right on the line there. The city called it the armpit of the city. We bought a house for $5,000.
Nice.
12-room house for $5,000. And we helped to start a little church in our house with another pastor and his wife that moved into the neighborhood. And for about 22 years, I worked for the Emmanuel Gospel Center as the neighborhood nurse.
Okay.
And what I did was, I had worked at Boston City Hospital for about 3 years. And then what I was realizing was most of my patients were my neighbors. And they were coming back and forth, and nobody could figure out how to help them stay well.
How to break the cycle.
Stay out of the hospital. Yeah.
How to break the cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so my feeling was, the way that cycle gets broken is for somebody to know that somebody cares about them.
Okay.
Because if you build a relationship with somebody, that relationship can motivate them to take care of themselves and do the right thing.
Okay.
And it can inhibit them from the wrong thing. And the same thing with the relationship with God. That relationship with God is that power, that love is what keeps you from doing the wrong thing, the destructive thing to yourself and everybody that cares about you, and do the right thing. And so I became the neighborhood nurse. I quit my job at Boston City and just started working for the Emmanuel Gospel Center. I worked for them for 22 years without receiving any salary. My husband...
So you're in it for the money then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can tell by the way I look, you know?
Yeah.
But
you come up here and become a legislator. At least we get $100 a year.
I started to bring people into our home that were homeless and sick. And when the AIDS epidemic hit my neighborhood, it hit hard and it hit fast. And within a year, everybody was suffering from either directly infected or affected in their immediate family by the virus, and they were dying because we had no way to treat it. We didn't understand it. We didn't know what was going on. But the IV drug users were dropping like flies all around me. And so
my cousin lived in Arlington and died of AIDS, and told this probably isn't funny, but anyway, I'll tell it anyway because I'm not that smart. I'm not that couth. I went for a ride with him because I wanted to spend some time with him before he passed away, because there was no cure in the mid '80s. No. That was it. It was a death sentence.
Absolutely.
And in the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, it was the three groups of people were people, Haitian people, gay people, or drug IV users was the three groups that were. And he told me that when he's dying, and we went for a ride and stuff, he says, you know what the hardest part of having AIDS is convincing your parents you're Haitian. Anyway, sorry.
That's okay. And then there were,
Now, how'd your husband handle that? Because I could see, you're doing this stuff, and you're doing it out of compassion, and I'm sure you're educating yourself as much information as you can at the same time. But your husband, what's he doing? Is he just, hiding in his room saying, I don't know what she's doing now?
He always felt like God. He went to Gordon Conwell Seminary. He
Okay.
graduated with a Master's of Divinity, but he felt like God was calling him to be the man behind the scenes. And so he helped me. He supported me. He was right behind me. There were many times when the AIDS epidemic was really at its peak, and I was getting put at risk a lot because I was out there,
Right.
and that frightened him a lot.
I would think. Definitely
yeah.
test your faith
And
anyway.
we had 4 little kids, and it was tough. And we brought in a couple of teenagers that we kind of unofficially adopted, but through it all we grew to know God, and our children grew to know who God really was. Not just know a lot about him, but you get to know him because he was with us. There was nothing I could do to fix that. It was just happening. But what I discovered was I was the vessel that God was using to be there.
Right.
To be there, to hold them. I've been with probably 200 people at their time of death.
Wow.
Just holding them in my arms, helping them to know without a doubt that they were going home to be with the Lord in heaven, and that their suffering was over. We had children being born with the virus, helping mothers find forgiveness.
Yeah, it's
And
tough. That's
The
huge.
guilt was killing the mothers, and it was making it almost impossible for the mothers to get sober and clean because they felt so guilty about their babies being born with the virus. And so it was challenging, but no matter where I turned, the first 3 steps of the 12 steps was the answer to me. Just whatever it was making their lives unmanageable. The fear, the guilt, the shame, the loneliness was making their lives unmanageable, but then helping them come to believe that there really was a power that loved them and knew them and had created them and had a purpose for their lives, no matter how hurt they were or what they'd done in the past, that they could find forgiveness and repentance and redemption.
Right.
It was redemption was what it was all about. And so people would move in with us. And this one particular woman moved in with us. I met her in the hospital, and she was the roommate of another patient that I had been taking care of in the community, in the neighborhood. And this one woman was dying of cancer, and she was an older woman. And I went in around 10 o'clock at night to sit and hold her hand and pray with her and just hold her hand because she was going to die momentarily. And she said to me, I was sitting there, and I thought I was doing a good thing, sitting there with her, and she said, I don't need you anymore. I'm done with you. I'm going home to be with Jesus any minute now. You brought God's love to me, but now you have to do that for my roommate. The lady behind the curtain really needs to know
Wow.
God's love the way you brought it to me. And I said, well, I don't know her. I've never met her. And she said, well, I don't know her either, but I've been listening to her talk to the doctors, and she really needs to know God.
Yeah.
And, you can't say no to a dying old lady.
Right,
So
right.
I said, okay. And I stood up and went over, and the curtains were drawn just close to each other, and I could see her in there. And I would say that was probably one of the most changing moments, life-changing moments for me, because God kind of stopped everything and had a conversation with me. And I haven't had too many conversations directly like that with God, but I was standing there looking at this woman, and because I'm a nurse, I knew what was going on when I saw her. She had 2 IVs going in her neck because her arms were scarred
All
with
collapsed, yeah.
track marks up and down both arms. And she smelled like that heroin withdrawal smell that I was very familiar with. And I could tell from the IV bags that were hanging up what she was dying of, that she had AIDS. And I looked at her, and I could hear the voice of Jesus say, do you love me? Like he did to Peter, do you love me? And I said, yes, I love you, Jesus. He said, well, that's one of my sheep. You got to take care of my sheep. And I said, well, I have a better idea, Jesus.
Oh, jeez.
That was when I was very much younger.
Yes.
I wouldn't dare say that to Jesus today, but I said, I think I should, she's Hispanic. I can tell to look at her. So I think I should go find a Spanish pastor who can minister to her much better than I can.
Right.
And that's what Jesus said. Right.
Yeah, right. Good one.
I didn't ask you all that. What I asked you, do you love me? And I said, yes, you know I do. And he said, but I want you to feed my sheep right there. And I said, well, I really think somebody else could do a better job than me, because I don't know that much about heroin addiction. I have 4 little kids at home. We don't know that much about the AIDS virus right now. I'd be kind of nervous about this, you know? And he said, but do you love me? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, then feed my sheep. And so I said, okay. And I opened my mouth and I said, excuse me, I was wondering, could I sit down and talk with you? I'd like to tell you about how much God loves you. And she looked at me and she said, yeah, well, I have nothing better to do. I'm bored out of my mind.
She spoke English?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fluently, which
Okay.
God knew already, but I just didn't. I was looking for a way out.
Yeah.
So I sat down with her, and the next 3 hours we sat there just talking. And she accepted Christ into her life that night. She came to believe. And then step 3, she surrendered her life to the God who loved her. And for the next year, she stayed in the hospital. They transferred her to about 4 or 5 different hospitals. She transferred everywhere she went. I went to see her every day for an entire year. And then she was discharged from the hospital and came to live with us, with my children and my husband.
She survived?
She survived. She came to live with us, and AZT was just out on the market. I gave her the AZT every 2 hours, round the clock. I gave her Bactrim every 6 hours. I worked hard to take care of this woman, and I was determined to give her the best care I could. At the same time, I gave her a family. And she came and she lived with us. When she moved in with us, she had been in Framingham prison. She was a thief. She was a prostitute. She was a heroin addict for over 20 years. She had abandoned all of her children. She had no idea where they were. And she was dying of AIDS. She became one of the most amazing women of God I've ever known in my life. She got sober. She stayed sober. She lived for about 4 years. She lived with us. I found all of her children, reunited her with her children, and she would go around speaking at different churches and meetings, and wherever I would take her, she would share her story of how God had given her a new life. And right before she died, she decided she wanted to have a going home party. And so she sent out invitations inviting everybody to come to her party because she was going to heaven. Her going away party. And so over 100 people showed up, people from the street, people from my neighborhood, people from suburban churches where she had spoken, shared her story. And we packed the place. My little house, my little church was packed with people. And right at the end, she was really, really sick. It was only a few weeks later that she died. But she stood up at the end and she said, you know, you'll forget my face, you'll forget my name, but please don't forget my message, that God gave me new life. And I was walking dead out there. I was in bondage to drug addiction. I was in bondage to fear, to hate. I was sexually, physically abused. But God gave me a whole new life, and there's thousands more out there just like me, and Beth can't do it alone. You got to help her carry that message. So when she died, I would have to say that my whole family was pretty devastated, because she had become such a part of my family. She was
Yeah.
a sibling to my children.
How
And-
old was she?
She was 45 years old,
Okay,
but she was like a child
Yeah.
in many, many ways.
right.
She was like a little kid. And she said she was 4 years old because she'd only known God for 4 years. So.
Yeah.
But it was very fascinating to me, because as sick as she was worried about the next guy, you know? And what I realized was, no matter how sick and suffering all the suffering she'd been through, she had become a true disciple, where she was concerned more with carrying the message of redemption to somebody else instead of worrying about herself,
Right.
which is very different than when you're stuck in bondage to drugs or fear or anything else. It's always about yourself.
Correct. Yeah, that's one of the hallmarks of recovery, is if you're actually becoming recovered, your focus is on helping others, not
Others.
on how bad, your problems are.
You are, yeah.
Yeah.
So I ended up really feeling like I was too tired and too broken to go on by myself. I was worn out. That's when I had the vision of God.
Now, wait.
Yes,
The vision.
yes.
The video I saw said you fasted for 3 days.
I did.
I assume you're at the point where you really don't know which way to turn.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know, you want direction. So explain to me, the audience, what's that all about?
After Rosita died, I was just devastated, as was my family, and I was tired. I was just so tired, and I didn't know how to go on. I didn't know if I could go on, but I knew I needed to go on, because the need was out there. Thousands around me, all over the place. And so I got by myself. I asked my husband, could I take these 3 days? I got by myself, and I fasted and prayed. Now, fasting means I didn't eat anything. I just drank water for 3 days, and I prayed, and I sought God. And I said, God, I have no idea how to go on. I don't have any idea what to do or how to continue. And that's the last day of the 3 days. I had this vision of Jesus. I couldn't really see him, but I could tell it was Jesus.
Yep.
It was like a figure of Jesus standing there, and his hand. And in his hand, there was the scar from the nail and the pieces of my broken heart, because my heart had been so broken by her death, by many other people dying in my neighborhood around me, and so sick and so suffering. And the wound in his hand started to bleed, and the blood went on the pieces of my heart, and it grew into this giant heart. In fact, he had to hold it with 2 hands.
Okay.
And I looked up to him to kind of say, okay, that heart's much too big for me. I can't handle that much love. I can't handle a heart that big. And when I looked up to say that to him, I could see the crown of thorns on the top of his head. I couldn't see his face, but I could see the thorns. And a drop of blood fell in my eye, and my eye grew to this giant eye. And I said, Jesus, I'm a freak. I have this giant eye. I have a giant heart. What am I going to do with it? It's too much vision. I can see the suffering out there. I can see it. And I love my neighbor as I love myself. I love you, God, with all my being. But that's too much love for me. And he said, I've given you my heart. You have the heart of God. And I've given you my vision. You know, there's a old Hebrew name of God called El Roy, the God who sees. And he said, you see their suffering, but you also see their potential. You see who they can become if they learn of me. And so take that giant eye and take that big heart I've given you and put it on a bigger body of people. Call together a body of Christ. Put it on them and call it the Place of Promise. And so that's how Place of Promise got started.
Wow.
So I called together a bunch of people that were at the going home party. And I said, this is my vision, this is what I want to do. And we started with just a little coffee house drop-in place because we didn't have we had no money.
Right.
And we didn't, I kind of made the steering committee into a board of directors. But we acted as a subsidiary of the Emmanuel Gospel Center for 2 years. And we ran this little drop-in center. And one of my neighbors, who had just gotten into recovery, and she had just started to be a believer and was interested in following Jesus, she started doing the coffee house with me.
Yeah.
So she and I did the coffee house, and people would come in off the street and just sit and talk, and we served them coffee and donuts and stuff. And now, as a nurse, I would bandage up their wounds if they had any. I would take care of them. I'd try to get them to detoxes, get them to hospitals if they were ready to go. And if they had the virus, I would try to get them the care that they needed. But mostly it was just sort of sitting and talking and being a place of hope and a place of escape from the street. And,
Yeah.
And then finally, after 2 years of doing that, we were able to purchase the first house that we bought, and that was in Dorchester, actually, not far from where I lived. And it was a wreck. It had been condemned by the city. So we bought that, and we started Place of Promise, and we became incorporated, and had an official board of directors, and I was the official executive director. And my neighbor Terry, who worked with me, she was my first staff person and my only staff person. and one of the residents would cook for me. And I used to tell everybody we had a very interesting menu. We had beans and rice one night and rice and beans the next night.
Well, that's good. You mix it up,
But that's how Place of Promise started, and that was 23 years ago.
Okay.
23 years ago, and 1994. And then we did that for several years right there in Dorchester. It was funny because the house had no electricity, it had no running water, it had no windows. And my first resident was a guy who I'd met on my street when I first moved to Roxbury.
Right.
He had been shot by the police, and he was homeless. He lived in his wheelchair. He was paralyzed from the waist down. Had a colostomy. Never had bags for his colostomy because he was in the street all the time. And he and I, over the years, he became a brother to me more than anything. But he took those 22 years to really finally give in and come to believe.
Oh, really?
Yes. And he almost drove me crazy.
Some of us are more stubborn than others.
But he finally came, and moved into Place of Promise, and he was my first resident. And we had taken the boards off the windows, and he was sitting with, it was March, so it was still a little chilly, and I gave him a blanket to wrap around himself because it was cold when the wind was blowing right through his room because we took the boards off the windows. And he said, "I'm so glad you worked so hard to make me feel right at home," because he'd lived in the street for those 22 years.
Yeah.
So, but he ended up really becoming a very incredible man. He, a couple of years later, became my residential house manager, lived in the house for 5 years and managed the house for me, especially at night when I couldn't be there and stuff.
Right.
And he was an amazing man. He died of a cerebral hemorrhage. It was a great loss for us. But he really changed everything for himself. He really turned his life around. Got sober and stayed sober the whole time. Brought a whole bunch of other people with him. The first year we opened, 16 of my residents died of AIDS.
Wow.
It was heartbreaking. But at the same time, sorrow and love go together. And I think I learned the depths of the love of God in ways that I never could have imagined it existed. And my relationship with God became something that I never knew I could have. And to the point where my relationship with God is by far the most important thing in my life. And I can't let anything interfere with that.
Yes.
So now we sold the house in Dorchester. After
Did you make a profit? That's the most important thing.
we did, we sold it. We bought it for God takes care of fools and children,
Right, okay.
and I'm
okay.
not a child, so
Okay, all
he
right.
watches
all right.
out for me. I bought that house for $34,000.
I thought you said it was condemned.
It was.
You still had to pay $34,000 for a condemned house.
Yes. Because I bought it from a contractor who
Okay.
bought it and then sold it to me for $34,000. And another one man from Newton Presbyterian Church came, and he was a retired master builder. He practically rebuilt the house for me.
Wow.
And people, Sunday school classes were raising money to put in windows, because we never took government funding. We still don't. So
Now, I don't want to get too political, but it's been my understanding that there's a lot of places who refuse to take government funding, because as soon as you do, then the key part of Place of Promise is that connection with Jesus Christ.
absolutely.
So all of a sudden you have to relinquish the keys to the government.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Well, it's kind of like my husband used to tell my sons, and when they were my daughters, I have 3 sons and 1 daughter, and he used to tell them, as long as I pay the bills, I call the shots.
right?
And that's, as long as the government's paying your bills, the government's in charge.
Right.
And I don't want anybody to be in charge but Jesus Christ.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was curious if that
He's the
was
center of Place of Promise.
because. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, absolutely, that's fine. And that's why we don't take government funding. And I think the other reason I don't take government funding is because I've lived in the inner city for 45 years now. And I've watched so many programs come and go because government funding says, here's a bunch of money, start this program. And for 3 years we have a program. And then it goes away. And the people get invested in that program, and then it's gone, and then another one comes along and it's gone, and another one comes. Place of Promise has come to the edge of not knowing whether we're going to be able to pay our bills next week, but somehow, some way, he's kept us going for 25 years, and not only going but growing.
Right.
That house we bought for $34,000, we sold 8 years later for $340,000.
So you made pretty good money.
We
on it.
did. We did pretty good. And then we paid cash for the 2 houses, 2 of the first 2 houses we got up in Lowell.
Lowell. Okay.
And so, because we had no mortgage on the houses, we were able to, because we also accept people regardless of their ability to pay anything. Most of our people don't pay anything when they come. They have no income. You can't expect an addict to have saved up enough to get in
Correct.
the front door.
Right. Unless you expect them to sell heroin so they can afford treatment.
Exactly. And we don't want to do that. So, and they come to you on the 5th of the month and they got their check on the 1st of the month. They don't have anything left.
Right.
And I know this. And I'm not going to tell them, well, you have to wait till next month and then come on the 1st when you have money, because when the 1st comes around, they're going to do the same thing again.
Oh, yeah.
Unless
yeah.
I help them. So,
Yeah. No, I've tried to help quite a few people in addiction, and as soon as they get money in their pocket, they're done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, without a mortgage, we're able to accept them into the program without having to worry too much about paying. Although now what we're trying to do now is grow the program.
Right.
bought 2 more houses, and those we're using as like a second level house. And I stay away from the word independent, because I don't believe in independence of people, certainly of our country. But
In what way? In other words, you don't believe that...
I believe in interdependence is what works. I believe that we are people created in the image of God, and therefore we need and want and long for connection with other people.
Right.
And what I can do well, somebody else does something else well, and we all come together and we make it work.
Right.
And that's how Place of Promise works. We all come together, all the volunteers, the staff, everybody comes together, the supporters, and we make it work. And it does work. But it works because we all work together.
Okay.
I think sometimes there's this push in our society to say, okay, you're better now. Now you can go out and live independently on your own. And what we're trying to help them understand is you become more adult in your functioning, and you take care of your own responsibilities, your own bills, your own everything. And you go to school or you go to job training, you get a job, you do different things, and you become more of an adult in the process, but not independent.
Right, right.
And no longer dependent on another person or substance or place or thing or any job or anything. You don't want to be dependent either, except on God.
Right, right.
Because if you're dependent on something else, then you're stuck, because you can't really be surrendered to God.
Yeah, because I think all those, especially, it's to me extremely obvious with alcohol and drugs. It's God. What God wants for you is for you to become not dependent on Him, but part of Him.
Exactly.
Like part of His community to help society, help people around
Part of
you.
His body. That's right.
And
Absolutely.
alcohol and drugs are a substitute, because everybody has that desire.
Absolutely.
And alcohol and drugs are a substitute to keep you from looking towards God.
Absolutely.
Because you people, like, for instance, I am sure there's somebody watching right now that's smoking a joint or drinking or doing something else who believes that they're making an independent decision to enjoy X.
Mm-hmm.
They are lying to themselves.
Absolutely.
Because the drug is making an independent decision to suck you in.
Absolutely.
They are not making decisions. The drugs are making the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what where the real problem is.
Absolutely.
People, as a politician, I hear people in Concord say, well, they have a choice. No, they don't.
No.
When somebody's addicted to heroin, they have no choice. They gave up the choice the first time they tried it.
One of the things that I've learned is those first 3 steps. The coming to believe there's a power greater than yourself. And also, what makes God unique is that He's a power that's the greatest power, but He's also the only power that won't eventually overpower you.
Right.
He always empowers you.
Okay.
By abiding in you and you abiding in Him, He empowers you. It's kind of like putting the battery in your car. You know, He gives you that power, but He never overpowers you. People start using, or they get in a relationship, or they gamble, or whatever they're addicted to, because they think it's empowering them. You know, let me have a drink and I won't be nervous when I go.
Right.
Or let me smoke that joint and I'll do better on that test. Or let me smoke that Coke and I feel like I can conquer the world. Because it starts out in the beginning feeling like
You're being empowered.
you're being empowered.
Right.
But it crosses that line very quickly, and you're not empowered, you're overpowered, and you don't have a choice anymore. It's not you calling the shots anymore. It's whatever you're addicted to controls the game every time.
Yep.
But God will never cross that line.
Right.
He never does. And that's an amazing thing.
It is. It is particularly awesome thing because it's. I think that's what's one of the problems we're having in the recovery community today is you've got today's society is pushing people away from God.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of recovery centers that are trying to achieve recovery absent God. And so they can teach the alcoholic not to drink. They can teach them how to do it one day at a time, how to, make a decision not to drink for today, and all the technical things that Alcoholics Anonymous has taught people for, many, many years. But without that key of spirituality, they're basically, I don't know. It's like they're pushing their car down the street instead of filling with gas.
Right.
Yeah, you can do it, but that's like the hard way.
And you usually wear out.
You do. It eventually wears you out.
I do intake interviews with people, and before they come into Place of Promise, and people often have years of sobriety, but they wear out, and they give in, because it's still there. It's still there. And unless you have replaced it with the true God that empowers you. Because we do all look to something to be our God.
Oh, yeah, we do. I know there's a lot of people. I've actually met people who say they have long-term sobriety and they're atheists, and I have yet to meet one that's happy. Maybe they exist. I don't know. I've never met one. But yeah, without that spiritual component, without Christ, I don't know. It's really, really difficult. If you look at the people who founded Alcoholics Anonymous, it was a Christian organization.
Absolutely, it was. Absolutely.
It's how it started.
That's right.
It was the power of God that got that. Just like your vision. It was the power of Jesus Christ working through you that got Place of Promise going. It was the power of Jesus Christ through, Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson that got AA going.
That's
and
right.
look how many people that's.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
That's
right. But it was God, and it still is. It still is.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I want to know if somebody needs help, how do they get in touch with Place of Promise?
They can.
Or if they want to help you out and donate money, because that would be a super awesome thing too.
That would be awesome. It would be awesome to be able to help out the next person that comes in. But what I usually suggest to people is either call me directly, call Place of Promise directly, or if you're in a facility, like if you're in a detox, in a hospital, in jail, even in a church someplace where you feel like you're lost and you need that help. And it doesn't have to be substance abuse. It can be anything that's keeping you from living. And you want to find that new life, call us. And what we would do is get some information from if you're in a facility, we get information from them. And then we would do an intake, face-to-face intake interview with you, and then you come in. And it doesn't take more than 24 hours.
Okay, now what is you said you have kind of long-term and short, how long do you keep people?
We ask them for a 6 months commitment.
Okay, that's your success rate's got to be huge.
It is.
Okay, if you look at a lot of the 28-day programs without God, their success rate is not great. And the reason it's not great, it doesn't have God.
And it's not long enough.
And it's not long enough.
Even 6 months is not long enough.
6 months ago is
for a lot of folks these days. But we ask them to at least commit to 6 months. And then what happens usually is people choose to stay longer.
Yeah.
And they choose to either go to the next level house, or they choose to stay even in the treatment level house. And what they do is they learn how to. We send them to mass rehab. they get their GED, they get college, they get job training, they get their jobs, all while they're still living in the community of Place of Promise, to help them, because it's that transition back into living as an adult in this world out there that you've been kind of in a fog for the last however many years.
Right.
And you never learned how to function as an adult, a healthy adult out
Right.
there. So that's
Yeah, because you don't want to just kick them out the door and just have them fall flat in their face because they don't know where to turn.
Definitely not.
You know?
Definitely not.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is just such a great thing to see people doing the Lord's work.
Yeah.
And looking in your eyes, I can see there's like equal amounts of pain that you've suffered, but there's that joy from doing it. It's you're an awesome lady. Thank you for coming up.
I say the only thing that happened is I'm probably the most ordinary person you could ever meet.
Yeah.
But I surrendered my life to Adonai, the master of life.
And that made your
And
life.
he made a masterpiece out of my life.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys next week.